Hello and welcome to another conversation about interesting things from software development. Today I have a special guest. Uh, he is usually behind the scenes here when we record conversations in the Mozaic Works studios, but today he will share with us more about his book and his research on remote pair programming. Welcome, Adi.
Hi, nice to be here.
So how is it to be on the other side of the uh, camera, let's say?
Well, it's interesting because I can do both, but it's interesting to be on both sides. I haven't been in a while on this side, let's say, so it's a good change for a while.
So today, what I wanted to discuss is you published a book on practical remote pair programming, best practices, tips, and techniques for collaborating productively. It's a long title. Uh,
Yeah, editors, they need to put everything in the title.
And before we go into the actual remote pair programming, I think it would be interesting to establish a bit the history and your personal history with pair programming. And these are things that we actually haven't had the opportunity to discuss because we usually work on many other things,
Yeah.
and we rarely have time to chat about those. So I'm really curious, what was your first experience doing pair programming?
Well, I guess probably when I started programming, I didn't start really programming until I in university. So then we always had these laboratories when we were working, and because we didn't have enough computers, we would always need to work two people on the same computer. Even though we didn't know that was called pairing, that's how we worked. So I'd say from not from the very first beginning, but from the university, from where I think I got my basis as programmer.
And then how was the experience back then? You were trying together to solve the same thing, but I imagine it wasn't very structured as pairing style. It was
No.
more like, well, whoever had an idea would jump in or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was like struggling and trying to find the professor or the assistant who was with us there in the room to guide us when we got stuck, and we got stuck quite often, so we can imagine very new systems for us, very weird things. I guess also a very different thing is that they were using very old Linux distributions that we didn't use. Everything was very new and very weird, and we needed to do everything by command by terminal commands. So it was kind of difficult to use. So that's why we were stuck. And yeah, I think we there were a few people who got more knew more from us, and even if we were like two on a computer, we'd go back to the other group or to the person that we knew that knew better, grab them by the hand and say, come on, help here, come and help us. So maybe it was more just than just pairing, just trying to learn.
This reminds me of how our friend David Hassman used to talk about that he was working on very complicated sound equipment, and usually you had two, three people working together there, and they call this working together, not pairing. And it was
Yeah.
such an interesting thing to hear him kind of demythicize all these stories, because we call them pair programming and we have strong opinions for or against, or sometimes many people don't care, but some people have a lot of opinions against pair programming or
Mhm.
misunderstand it. But when you think about it as working together, it doesn't sound so strange after all. It's,
Yeah, I think many people have something against working together. So, I learned programming when I was in university, but there are so many people who learn programming by their own. So, I guess for them, the natural way of working as programming is solo. And okay, all the hackers, all the many programmers who are extremely good are solo programmers because that's how they learn, and probably they prefer it like this.
So, what was then your first experience per programming in a professional environment after university, or once you got into, I don't know, was it in a project or was it
Mhm.
during consultancy or coaching?
No, I think it was when I started programming, and it was the same thing because you're a junior programmer, you start working, and I was used to when I don't know something, I need to grab someone by the hand and like, come on, let's do this, or teach me how to do this and that. So it was what I call in the book a kind of a pairing, the natural pair programming approach. So that happens everywhere all the time in a team, and just grabbing someone and saying, help me do this. That was the first experience, and it was, I think, it's more about an attitude than an experience. It's the attitude that you need to, if you're stuck, you shouldn't stay there for days. This is what I think many junior programmers do because they're afraid to say, I don't know how to do this. But just the fact that you are a beginner, it means that it's natural that you don't know well how to do this and that and many things. So I guess for any junior programmer, it is important when you're stuck to ask someone, okay, try again, but don't sit there for 3 days and then say, I don't know what to do. Sit there for 3 hours and then ask for help.
I like to make a parallel with something I learned from a completely different community, the StarCraft 2 community. The people who play StarCraft 2, and sometimes a very high level. So I'm talking about people who are actually participating in contests and winning prizes and in money. So no, they are the best of the best. And one thing in StarCraft 2 is that it's you play 1-to-1 usually. You can also play 2 versus 2 and so on, but usually the most common competition format is 1 versus 1. And whenever you lose, you have nobody else to blame, only yourself. And so everybody understands that they know very little about the game, even though these are the best people who know a lot about the game. And there is
Mhm.
some kind of interesting situation when they discuss strategies and help each other, even though they compete. And I enjoy this attitude, and I draw a parallel to this attitude in programming, where no matter how long you are in programming, you still don't know a lot.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I think this is the discussion I keep having for maybe 5, 6, 7 years now with programmers and managers, that the Dunning-Kruger effect applies a lot. The less you know, the more you think you know, and the more you know, the more you understand you don't know. So I think this is what happens here as well, because you have experts in that game. Probably those experts understand the intricacies and the very small details of the game. It's the same with programming. It's the same with many things. And then, then if you don't know a lot, you start thinking you know quite a lot. And I think the most critical people, even with pair programming, when pairing, the most critical people are in fact people who think they know a lot, but they should learn a lot more.
So going back to pair programming and your experiences, I think another step in this was uh, were two things, and perhaps you can share some light on the chronology. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, there were community events like code retreats, coding dojos, and so on, where that you attended and that sometimes we both attended, and where a lot of pair programming was used. But on the other hand, you also had a series of remote pair programming videos.
Yeah.
Which came first, and how was the experience with each of those?
I started with code treats. We started those both a long time ago. I don't even remember when. Uh, the first ones were in Bucharest, and then I moved back. I moved to Belgium, where I continued facilitating a lot of code treats for 2.5 years almost with Eric Talbum. And we were moving around. So we facilitated some in Netherlands and Germany and France and the UK. And I also attended a lot of these events, attended conferences where people were coding, and I saw in code retreats a great opportunity to learn. So then I thought, you should always see what everyone has to offer, what everyone can teach you, and the code retreat or any conference, any community event is a great situation for this learning. And I think you can learn by talking with people. You can learn by doing things together, by co-facilitating what I have done with Eric and with other people as well. But with Eric, we've done a lot of them. And also pairing with people. Quite often during the code retreats, because we were two facilitators, if there was an odd number of people, then we would go and pair with the person who remained at the end, and we would take turns. So that was also somehow we were facilitating, but sometimes also pairing, depending on the audience. And I saw that it was very interesting, although difficult, especially in the beginning, because everybody has their language, their keyboard setup, their ID setup, their shortcuts. Also, there's this big annoyance with keyboards when you go international. The Belgian keyboard, the German keyboard, the French keyboard, the UK keyboard, the US keyboard. So it's extremely difficult to get around. Even the Swiss keyboard. So it's very complicated. After a while, I think after 40 or 50 of these pairing sessions with different people from with different keyboards, I started getting used to it. It didn't bother me. And well, probably the key to success here is don't look at the keyboard and really know your QWERTY keyboard. Turn on English, or mine is US English. Put it on US English, and then don't look at the keyboard and type as you know better. So that's the best solution. Anyway, I learned a lot about many things, from how to work in a specific programming languages, or a lot about object-oriented programming, functional programming, about many interesting ideas on design. I learned a lot of things from these pairing sessions. So I thought after a while, when I didn't have the energy and the time to facilitate code retreats anymore and to have this opportunity of pairing with people, I thought, why not continue with some pair programming? And I started having these YouTube videos on remote pair programming. This happened after something, let's say, more difficult or less difficult from some point of view, going very deep into a style of test-driven development called TDD as if you meant it. So I recorded solo a series on that. I recorded series on legacy code, and then I started this with the remote pair programming series. which is very interesting in a remote way, because I learned from this series that you can pair with anyone without knowing them, with the condition that you need to have a certain degree of respect and understanding and empathy towards your pair. So I think from this, there are many recordings, or I don't know, a few tens of videos on this. But I paired with with many other people who didn't want to be on the video. So not all the sessions and all the experiences are there recorded. Even like that, I can say that a lot of those people taught me a lot of things, and probably they learned a lot of things as well. And this was the striking thing, probably the fact that you can learn a lot from someone you don't know, because this is how things happen. I just put a calendar entry on my blog, on my website, and then I would distribute it in the communities, in the software craft communities, and ask people, if you want to pair with me, just pick a spot. And there were a lot of times people I don't know and people I have never met in person, who were just, well, pairing partners for 2 hours and that's all, and I never saw them again. And that's very interesting to see.
Yeah, and I know this feeling because I've tried remote pair programming as well. I didn't record any of the sessions, but I tried it and it was quite fun. Particularly when sometimes I was in the countryside or I was somewhere, somewhere around Europe, and I could still write code with people who and have some fun most of the times with people who are willing to spend 1 or 2 hours to learn more, or at least to exchange experiences with somebody they often didn't know. It's quite an amazing thing. But if we go back, let's now go deeper into the details of pair programming, because I think there are many misconceptions and many things that are talked about around pair programming. And let's start on a personal level. So, as a programmer, uh, what do you think is most valuable for doing pair programming within your organization or within a community?
It's tough to say. It's very much dependent on what you are doing. Because if you're doing COBOL in your organization, probably that's the only place you'll be able to do pair programming. And I don't even know how to do pair programming COBOL because I've never used it. Um, if you're using the modern languages, I guess both should come. To some extent, they are something that help you. Pairing in an organization is often difficult because there are these ideas that typically project managers have, saying that you lose the time because two people are doing the job of one, and they are counting just the time that you spend writing the code, not the time that you spend debugging it, fixing bugs, then putting again the new version in production. All that is an extreme cost that you would probably fix, or part of it wouldn't exist if you use pair programming well. So these misconceptions, I think, are a bad thing for the organization, but they are the reason why pair programming doesn't happen. Now we are in a pandemic, and remote pair programming seems even more difficult because most of the people I know working in programming nowadays are working from their home and from a remote office. So with remote pair programming, you need even more. You need access to repositories, and you don't have access to those because security reasons, and you need tools, and you don't have those tools because the organization doesn't buy them because they think they're too expensive. So I think there are a lot of reasons why people don't pair in organizations. And there's this one, the very project oriented view on things, just counting hours. There's the mentality that, for some people are right about this as well, that you might get into a conflict with the other programmer, and it's not worth being annoyed about pairing with the other. Uh, and some others are saying, what could I have to learn? I know so much, nobody can teach me more, so I'm just doing my job. That's another attitude I see, and I see quite often. I think the people who pair in communities already want to learn, and they understand, so they are past the Dunning-Kruger effect. They understand that they can learn, they should learn, they need to learn more than they know, and there are so many things where they need to improve. And I don't think there are many of them. Probably the percentage is very small from all the programmers. The percentage of programmers who go into communities and learn preparing.
Okay, but you mentioned a lot of things that are, let's say, the downsides or difficult to overcome. So let me rephrase the initial question, which was, as a programmer, why would I want to pair program? What are the benefits for me personally?
Yeah, I think the benefits are that you are always able to keep up. It's very difficult to keep up in this world. I think that we have more and more things to learn. If you look 10 years back, if you look 20 years back, 30 years back, now there are so many new libraries, new ideas, new languages. I mean, even the speed on which new things appear, and they don't only come trending, but they start being applied and used, it's huge. So my strategy of learning is finding someone who knows a lot about that topic and liked that topic, is an expert on that topic, and I want to pair with them to understand faster about how to use it. Because yes, you can look on videos online, and that's a good thing. I am doing that as well. You can read the documentation, you can try it out yourself, but I think trying something new with an expert on your side is the fastest way of learning. So if you look only on Docker, how fast it grew and how complex it is, and how everybody's using it nowadays. And there's so many things like that: new programming languages, new frameworks, new approaches to programming. I think pair programming helps you keep up, and that's extremely important if you want to still be uh, up to date in program with, yeah, in your job, I guess.
Okay, but you have Stack Overflow, right? So you can always go and
Yeah,
search on Stack Overflow,
of course.
copy paste an answer from there, and
Yeah,
it works, maybe. And
of course. Yeah, but I think it's not that efficient. That's the only thing. I mean, Stack Overflow is good for answers, but you need to know the question. That's the problem. When you have something completely new, you don't even know what to look at, and you need a lot of time to understand what's that new thing that I need to do now. So you need a basis. You need at least something to know what you need to learn more about.
Okay, so that's on a, let's say, on a personal level.
Hmm.
Now, if we look in terms of organization, so let's say I'm a manager in an organization and I see that people are writing code together instead of each of them having their own task, what should be my
Hmm.
reaction to that and why?
I think we are looking at a new type of management, in fact, because I don't know why we're still thinking that programmers are like workers in a factory and they are producing, I don't know, screws or something, small parts, and everybody should produce 230.5 screws per week. It doesn't make any sense because nowadays all the systems are so complex and becoming even more complex. So, as a manager, I would look at the cost of changing and improving my system because our systems change and change faster and faster because the market pressure, and because they change faster and faster, we need to be more and more sure that our the changes that we do don't affect the existing features. So we don't introduce new defects, we don't introduce problems or security breaches, or we don't cause some failures that might mean that we lose money or customers. So that's the type of management I'm looking at and I'm thinking about. And for that type of management, you need to trust your programmers that they should take their time, because this situation happens way too often. You see the team, the management or the product owner or the business comes and says, "We need this," and the team says, "Probably 2 3 weeks." And I say, "No, no, no, no. It cannot be 2 weeks. We need it in 3 days." So you'll get the quality in 3 days. You'll get the quality that is, and then you if you put again pressure and again pressure, you'll start seeing defects. And the cost of defects is huge. It's not only that you need to work on the defects and you lose time and money for them, it's also that you don't work on important features for your customers. So it's double loss. Now, if you work in pairs and if you have a sustainable pace, if you work with more programming on very complex problems, where let's let's imagine that you have a big organization where you need people from various departments, 5 6 7 8 people who need to look at the code. What are we doing now is we are passing that code around, and instead of putting everybody in a room and making sure that it's done in 2 3 hours, we probably take 3 4 weeks until that feature is done. And that's only because we still think in these silos and think in this way that you need to work as factory employees. So that's one of the advantages, I guess, faster time to market from the point of view of management and the organization. Because if you put more people together to work on something, you'll probably not be that efficient as in a factory worker, but you'll have faster time to market. And I think these are the things that every manager needs to put in the balance. What the cost of the workers and what's the cost of delaying the the feature to the market. I think there isn't an universal answer. It depends on your business and on the market and so on. But I think this is where pair programming comes extremely helpful. that you have less defects and you can work faster and finishing things faster without these ping pongs in between programmers.
And I think I noticed, well, I know I noticed a few other things when I was pair programming with people. And one of them is that you have less of a downtime. It happens
Yeah,
as a programmer that you start on a problem and that you kind of get derailed. You focus so
it's more
much
intense.
you focus so much on the problem that then you start thinking on a lot of other things, and 1 hour later you realize that you are working on something completely different and you are stuck,
Yeah.
and it's not precisely what you're.
Mhm.
And this is something that in the dynamics of pair programming doesn't happen, because you always have somebody to tell you, oh, why are we
Mhm.
working on that? What are we trying to solve now? um,
Yeah, in the book I'm calling this focus. So you remain focused on the problem, and it has two effects. The first effect is that for a short period of time you'll get things done a lot faster. The downside is that you'd get more tired, especially for programmers who are new to pair programming. 1 hour or 2 hours a day of pair programming means that you cannot do anything else the whole day.
and the second thing that I noticed is that often you end up with simpler solutions. Simpler
Mhm.
in the sense of you have less code written that solves the same problem
Yeah.
that you need to solve. Although occasionally another very interesting thing happens is that you start from a problem and you try to solve it, and then you solve part of it, and then you realize, maybe that's all that we need. Then you go to the product owner
Mhm.
and you, is that
You
enough? And they
stop.
say, oh, actually that is enough. We don't need the full thing that we thought we needed. That's probably just good enough, and we can just stop here.
Mhm.
And it's good to end up with less code, because when you have less code, it's less code to maintain, it's less code to test, it's less code to change, less code um, to look at in case you have a problem. So it's
Yeah.
always a better idea. And you do that because two people are working on the same problem, and by having these views that complement each other, you end up with simplification instead of growing code to hundreds of lines. You can write the same things probably in 10, 20 lines and it will still work perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think simplicity is something very difficult to learn. And if even if you are a master of simplicity, you still learn from a pairing session from someone that this can be even simpler than I thought. Because it's very difficult to see things in a simple way. Typically, our mind works that we find a solution that we think is good, and then we need to think it over and over and over. The discussions that we have during pair programming help us reanalyze the solution that we have or part of the solution that we have. And if we have this mindset of continuous improvement, of trying to improve the things that we already have, you end up with simpler solutions. Already, it's, I think, a more advanced approach to pair programming. I don't think everybody does that. You need to be very focused on wanting to have a simpler solution.
So then if you go back to the cost benefit analysis from terms of view of managers, what you have in terms of cost is you pay two people for a
Yeah.
certain period of time. Um, and what you get as advantages is fewer bugs, less, well, potential advantages, let's say, because not
Yeah,
always.
you don't
Fewer
know.
bugs, simpler code, which means a faster speed of development in the future, faster time to market because you solve problems
Hmm.
faster. So these are potential advantages, but they don't always happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you know whether pair programming works or not in your organization?
I think you need to try it to see where it works and where it doesn't. Of course, people who have done it before in organizations can help you. Maybe some experienced coaches, some senior programmers, maybe some software architects. They might know to tell you where it works better. But in my experience, where you have complex problems, it works a lot better to have pair programming or even more programming. I'm thinking now from recent customers that I have where if they would have used mobbing or pairing, it would have been a lot faster because pair programming works in that spot, in that area where there isn't just one person who is the expert on something. So in if an organization wants to start using remote pair programming, I think that's the place to start working with pair programming. You have an area in between expertise. So I don't know. There's a feature with two experts, and one is to write part of it, one is to write the other, but they are kind of interconnected. They need to work together in a way or another. The typical traditional approach is that the first expert writes something, passes the code to the other one writes it and says, no, it's not good, this one you need to change. The other one goes back and changes a bit, but says, no, look, this part that you wrote here is not good. So we have this kind of ping pong that generates frustration, lack of efficiency, a very bad time to market, a lot of wasted time. Probably all those changes that happen in the code generate defects. So in those situations, putting those two experts together and working together on the problem for a few hours, for a few days, it's the best place to start.
And I think one last thing that I would like to explain to managers is that the metaphor of construction in software development, and or as you mentioned as a factory, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's a broken metaphor. We used it for in the beginning because there was nothing like software development, and it was very hard. We needed something to use that's similar to software development. But I think it's time to move to the next metaphor, and we had some conversations and also some recorded videos about this on this channel, which is you look at the teams as a knowledge refinery. You get some knowledge in that is unrefined, it's all over the place, it's things that we would like to see in a product to work somehow. And what you get is very, very strict, very precise code that works on a computer. And so it has to be very precisely explained because computers are stupid. They will only do exactly what you tell them to do. Unless you use some kind of AI, which is a completely different problem. So, and if you look at it like this, then what do you need inside this refinery? If you put more brains together, they will refine faster. If you are keep copying information from one brain to another, not only you get losses, because whenever we copy information from brain to brain, some part of it gets lost. But you also get this inefficiency of copying. Like keep copying. And that's one explanation that kind of unifies many of these practices that we are using and that we know that work, but we cannot quite explain why they work. And I think this is why they work, because we have the wrong metaphor. We need to use the metaphor of a knowledge refinery instead.
I think the difficulty comes from various reasons, various parts in an organization, because typically, we have the IT or let's say these new shiny types of organizations that once were a startup, but now they are typically an IT organization. They are their main focus is IT. These big corporates or smaller corporates or startups, but you also have these very old, which aren't a few, are quite a lot probably. These very old organizations who have these IT departments, and the problem is that the IT department doesn't resemble with anything else they're doing. So I think this is where the difficulty comes from. You cannot say that the salespeople are the same with the IT crowd from that organization. They have different needs. You cannot say that, I don't know, the people who tackle operations in that organization are the same with the people from the IT. And I think it's difficult for these organizations who I don't know exactly from any statistics, but in my mind they are a lot more than the big IT organizations that started only as an IT organization. And it's difficult. They need to have more types of management, right? And I think this is where the reluctance to ideas like pair programming comes, and the reluctance or the lack of understanding on how to manage an programming team or testing team or a cross-functional team, because they are doing something else, and then they're promoted as managers to the IT part, and they'll use the same type of management they're used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that there is a mind shift required to deal with these things. And I think the construction metaphor doesn't help at all.
No,
So
no.
that's why
But
we
I
need
think
another one.
even now, if I look, typically in those big organizations, you have project managers who are taught by the PMI standards, and the PMI standards are extremely good for I don't know, construction, for factory production, for, okay, you name it. I don't know, electricity production, anything. Uh, but the same manager, the same project managers then start work as IT project managers, and they use the same tools, and that's flawed.
Okay, so going back to from the management side to personal experience. Um, One misconception is that if you're doing pair programming, you should be doing pair programming 8 hours a day, every day. So that's something I
Yeah.
heard very often.
No, I think even if you are extremely, uh, I don't know, motivated and you like a lot pair programming, you should use it as a tool when it makes sense. I really like this metaphor of a tool belt that I often use. We need to understand that all these things are tools for us, uh, like the programming language or the languages that we use, the tools like the IDE, the editors, the these tools that we use now for video conversation. I don't know, all the things that we know are tools, and remote pair programming, code reviews. All of these things are tools, and we should use them when they make sense, when they help us, not when they don't. So it's a good thing to have a lot of these tools in your belt, but as I really like tinkering, and I learned over the years doing a lot of things from carpentry to plastering and using concrete and you name it, almost everything. I know that there are specific tools for a specific thing. If you use the wrong tool, you will probably make the work done, but it won't be that nice. You don't have the same nice finish in the wood if you don't use the right tool. Or you finish it, but in a longer time, because the tool didn't help you that much. I think it's the same here. Pair programming is a tool, and it helps in some areas. As carpenters, as let's say experienced carpenters, know which tool to use in which situation because they were confronted with that situation. I think it's the same with programmers. Experienced programmers should know, because they were exposed to different situations, know when to use pair programming. But you need to try it. You need to take that tool and try it out, and maybe you need to have a more experienced programmer near you to help you understand when to use that specific tool. It's the same with carpenters. If you're a beginner carpenter, probably it's a good idea to have a more experienced carpenter near you, or watch tutorials, or have some classes in carpentry and learn when to use those tools. It's the same here. And okay, you can know already that there are some situations where pair programming helps and where it doesn't. So that's why I would think that in this tool belt you have pair programming and remote pair programming as a tool, which you should use only when needed. As I mentioned, it's about the complexity and the complexity of your task. If you have something to do that's extremely simple, don't use pair programming. If you have a task that is free of any, or almost free of any probability of introducing a defect, don't use pair programming. If you are doing something, I don't know, like configuration, the very simple type of configuration where you don't need to, so yeah, don't use it. And 8 hours per day is a lot anyway. uh, I think probably if you pair a few hours per day already, and you do that daily, you are already an extreme pair programmer, in my view. Typically, even when pairing, it's very interesting is that during my longer pair programming sessions, where we would take like 4, 5, 6 hours, sometimes we would diverge. And I saw that happening naturally. So we would say we worked on that part together, and then we'd say, you know what, I'll do this config and you'll do the other. Because it doesn't make sense me looking at you how you install, I don't know which, the JUnit library, because we need it now. It's something that you know how to do, but in the meantime I'll install the other thing that we need. So in this way you, in a way, you are working together, but you're not pairing on the same thing. You are working together on the same focus, on the same topic, and you are moving things 2 times faster, because you are parallelizing work, but you are pairing only when needed. So I think this happens naturally even in the pair programming sessions. But you're working together, and the focus factor remains. The fact that you have this focus because you are working with someone, and your mind cannot go somewhere else very far away.
Another misconception that I keep hearing is that pair programming is always an experienced programmer who writes code with somebody less experienced and shows them how things are done.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true.
it's a one-way learning, and as an experienced programmer, you have nothing to learn from somebody less experienced than you, because you already know a lot, and you're just there because you need to teach the others how to do their job.
I think it's again the Dunning-Kruger effect. I think if you are in this situation, you should think a lot about how much you have to learn. If you think that you know everything about programming, well, that's huge. I mean, even if you know, I think not even the a language creator, a programming language creator, cannot say they know everything about their own language, like with Python or with JavaScript, or they cannot know everything. So I think this is just a personal mindset problem, and probably it comes also from that age of the industrial age, when you'll start working, and then in 5 years or so you start becoming good at your job, and then in 10 years you say that you have nothing else to learn because you know everything that you need to do in that factory. That situation is very different in the knowledge world than the factory industrial world.
And I can attest to that, that I paired with junior programmers. I even paired with people who had no knowledge of programming whatsoever. They just wanted to learn a programming language, and they had seen other people writing code, but they didn't know how to write code. And even in those situations, I learned something new, because there's always another way of thinking about a problem. There's always questions that they ask that I hadn't thought about, or at least I hadn't thought about in that particular way, and so on. And there's always, I guess to me, that's one of the interesting parts about pairing, is there's always something surprising happening during a pairing session. What was
Yeah,
the most
yeah.
surprising thing that happened to you during a pairing session?
I don't know. There's so many. Each of the sessions, if each time I was pairing with someone, there was something surprising, probably. And it doesn't necessarily have to do, for me personally, with what is surprising with the coding part, with the technical part. Sometimes it's a way of thinking, it's a way of analyzing things. It's a totally different approach that I didn't think about. And I think it made me a better analyst, in fact, because we quite often forget about this part of analysis when we're doing programming. Pairing with a lot of people gives you a lot of ways of alternative thinking and looking at the problem in very different, in various ways. And I think that's always surprising. Just look at your pair and say, "Oh, you can do this. Okay, let's try that." So yeah, I don't know. Probably there were some situations where I would just leave my pair do something that was extremely wild, and it worked from the first. That was the most surprising. So, wow, it works. Shocking.
So now if we go back, let's say I'm convinced now that I should try pair programming. Okay. Uh, what are some procedural aspects of doing pair programming? So how should I set it up? Let's say I find a colleague who's interested in that, but we've never done this before. We just heard about pair programming. How do we start, and what should we look at in terms of the actual procedure of working together?
Mhm. I mentioned a bit that when you're face to face, it's easier. You just sit in front of a laptop and then you start working on the problem, trying to collaborate as much as possible. Probably this is the shocking part, that pair programming starts being a social activity a lot more than a technical activity. You need to communicate well, and even if you feel that something is annoying, at least that's what I do. I leave my pair doing it, and Then we take a break and I explain what I found annoying, or I ask to my pair that would like to do a debriefing on what happened. That's my approach. Wasn't doing that in the beginning. I would stop, but I saw that this is counterproductive because if I'm stopping someone, probably they have a good idea, and I'm just stopping that flow. So this is the first thing: be patient. Be patient with the other person's ways. Try to before opening your mouth that it's not a good thing, it's you don't like it, it's not the correct approach, that's not how you do it. Just refrain from all of that and leave your pair work as they know. And so yeah, both of the pairs, you should do that. And after a while, I typically do this after an hour or so, have this kind of a debrief and discuss what happened. And we always discuss what was surprising, what we learned from each other. I think the debriefing part is very important because you can tell your pair what was annoying, and maybe they will stop doing that. You can tell your pair what you liked. You can, in this way, like in a marriage, you start adapting one to another, and you start working better. And this is like the face-to-face um, option. When you're in your remote setting, it's more complicated because you need a tool, and there are some tools, but none of those tools are great. Typically, they are language dependent or ID dependent, at least. So there are these type of add-ons that you put on the IDE, and you can start working in a remote way. And I think this is the best approach if your IDE doesn't have that natively. And I think the only IDE that I have worked with and has this native approach is from Microsoft, the Visual Studio, but and it works with any programming language, shockingly, or well, not any, but many of the modern programming languages. So then you have also these add-ons that exist, like Fluebits or Code Together, which work, but they have some problems. They're not that good yet, and you can use them on the JetBrains IDs, and they work good. But besides that, I'm also writing about this in my book. I think you should also have the visual video conversation with your pair. So that's why I like having a monitor with or a computer with the code, and the computer with my remote pair on a video conversation, a video tool like this one or any other video tool that you like. And this way it's like you're having the other person closer to you. And in any pairing or working together scenario, it's very important to also see the expression of your partner's face to understand more than what's being said in words. So I think this is the simplest setup that you can do, with a big focus on the debrief that acts like a kind of a continuous improvement approach.
So to summarize, set some kind of time time box, 1 hour or 90 minutes or something like
Yeah,
that.
not more than 1 hour, I would say.
Okay.
It's very tiring.
So if you start just 1 hour, it can be 45 minutes, for example. Start from a clear problem, ideally. So something that you at least understand, or or spend some time trying to understand it before you start writing code
Mm-hmm.
for it. And then start writing code together, try to alternate. So one person should not write all all this time the keyboard. Try to switch the keyboard, um, and end with a debriefing, going through what happened and what was good, what each of you felt about the experience, and how you think you can improve, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
then,
also use this. I didn't mention. I like noting down things. So for the debriefing, at least is very effective for me to have paper, pen and paper, and I write things down. Even if I'm sitting near someone or if I'm remote, I do the same thing. And then the debriefing comes very smooth, very fast.
yeah, because you already have the notes. Um, and in terms of remote, I think the easiest version of remote pair programming that I used for a long time was we would have a common Git repository in our case,
Mm-hmm.
GitHub repository. We would alternate, and the way we would alternate is, let's say we are on some kind of audio video tool. I share the screen, I start typing while we discuss, um, and after 7 or 10 minutes, and so I push everything I've done. I close my screen sharing, and my pair starts screen sharing, pulls the changes, goes from there.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, you never type on another person computer, because that's annoying. They might have different shortcuts or whatever. Especially
And
when
there's a
you
lag.
there's a lag, especially when you don't know them, when you are not in the same team. They might have shortcuts or plugins or all kinds of other things. um, I might use Vim, they might use IntelliJ, who knows.
Mm.
So in that situation, that's very easy, but it has an additional, let's say, small overhead that you need to push to a
Yeah,
repository.
but this works well, as we mentioned in a community kind of pairing. But when you're working in an organization, you cannot do that typically because you need access to that code repository, and if you're not in the same team, you won't have access to it.
Yeah, I mean,
And
of course. Yeah.
so there are a lot of reasons how this doesn't work, and even like that, people would prefer that you don't push code, even if it's a small branch. You don't push code that's not done. So that's something that I saw people are extremely crazy about. So
Yeah, that's weird to me, because I would create a branch for
yeah,
just
me too.
that lives for just 2 hours, and
Yeah,
then what I at the end of those 2 hours, if I need to do anything else, I would adjust and
or,
add more code and so on,
yeah,
and then merge into the branch, and then I don't care, and delete the old branch and whatever.
yeah.
It's like it never existed.
There's that whole discussion about trunk-based development and not using branches, and I don't know. People are used to that, I guess, more, and so this approach gets a lot very strong um, over their confidence zone.
Yeah, but I mean, in trunk-based development, you you need to use feature toggles anyway. So this is just another feature toggle.
Yeah, but then you need to put the feature toggle, and not everybody is allowed to put the
Yeah,
feature
of
toggle.
course. Yeah, yeah,
So there you
definitely.
go.
All right. So we talked a bit about what are some advantages and what are some organizational views, let's say, what are some challenges in an organization and in a team. Now, if I go through the chapters in your book, um, You have one chapter that talks about pair programming techniques and styles, and I know these
Yeah.
there are multiple styles here. Uh,
Hmm.
can you perhaps elaborate on some of those?
Yeah, this becomes complicated in that moment. So I don't, I wouldn't go very deep into them because it becomes really complicated, and I think you really need to take a read at the book, um, because there are very small, apparently small differences when looking at these things. Uh, Probably the people know most about the ping pong technique, which means that every once in a while you have two people in a pair. The one of them writes the code, and the other one helps looking at the strategy further away. The person who's writing the code is called a driver, and the other one is called a navigator. In ping pong, there is this strategy of changing the driver and the navigator, and there are two approaches. So one is by timer, so let's say you put a timer every 5 minutes, and every 5 minutes the driver becomes the navigator and the navigator becomes driver, and in this way you have the opportunity to look both at the implementation details as a driver and as at the longer strategic decisions as a navigator. The other approach is when you're doing test-driven development. When you write a small test, you don't just make it work, you make it compile, but the test is red. Then you pass it to the other person to make it green. The other person writes the new test, make sure it compiles, gives it back. So this is the ping pong technique that people use a lot, and I think it's really useful and it's really interesting. But you need to fairly experienced programmers. I wouldn't use ping pong with a junior programmer because it's extremely stressful and extremely difficult. And then probably another thing that's very common to nowadays, especially because small programming started being a lot more used in organizations, is the strong style pairing, where uh, I think quite opposite to the ping pong pair programming. The driver is just a keyboard, a smart keyboard, we say, and the navigator dictates everything that the driver needs to do. So everything, all the details, all the strategical and tactical and detail decisions are taken by the navigator, and the driver just knows how to implement those. So you might say something very simple like create an object of type that, and the smart keyboard will write it. You don't need really to dictate each word. That's not the idea, but just give instructions on what they need to do. And that can be interesting, can be useful. It's also controversial, I think. A lot of people find it annoying. It's a lot like considering that you as a programmer, when you are in a driver's seat, you don't know anything, and you need to be told exactly what to do. So it can become annoying, especially for people who aren't used to this way of working. But it's something that I think you should try a few times at least to get it right, and try it with a navigator who really knows what they're doing. And yeah, there are a few others which I won't go into, like the with beginner advanced, where you teach someone basically, but that's more for coaches, for trainers, for technical coaches. So that's very useful when, or maybe for senior programmers who want to learn, who want to teach other very non-experienced programmers things. And there's another thing that I learned, and I really want to mention this from Ferdinando Santa Croce. we were pairing together, and we had a very different approach of pairing. And this is also recorded, I don't think, quite some years back. And we had this approach where, which she told me he calls this elastic pair programming, meaning that you don't have this rigidity as with ping pong or with strong style. If you have an idea, you grab the keyboard and you follow it. That's elastic pair programming, and no one minds. And I think it's extremely useful for teams where you have a lot of experienced programmers. And you just say, I have an idea, let's try this. And everybody watches, or the pair watches and waits a bit for the idea to structure, and then you discuss about it. What do you think about my ideas? No, I have another idea. I want to show it to you. And then it's like a kind of a brainstorming with coding, and then you pick the best idea and you start working with the one that you consider is more appropriate. So I think this is the most efficient approach when you have extremely advanced type of a team where anyone can do that. Anyone can have ideas, grab the keyboard, and you can discuss on facts, not on opinions. On I like this better, but on real facts, you have this availability of choosing solution, the best solution. Never mind who started it, who came with it first.
Yeah, so I realized that my approach to pair programming, at least I have a few approaches. In community, whenever I pair program in community, what I try to do is to provide the best experience for my pair. And so I try to understand what they are looking for and kind of give back as much as possible. And one way to do that is by asking open questions. So if if I see that, for example, this often happens, they don't have experience with test-driven development, and they ask, okay, so how do I start? And I say, so we write a first test that fails, whatever. What do you think should be the first test? And we go into a conversation from there, and then we start. And this means that working with somebody else, they will take from your energy. And so there's a limited time span that you can spend working with other people, and then you often feel exhausted. And that's my case as well. When I tend to get exhausted when I work with people. Are there any, so how should we deal with these things?
I I'm writing in the book as well that people are different, and they need to be acknowledged for that. There are people who pair for the whole day, the whole week, and don't feel tired. On the other side, there are people who become tired after a while. And I think the pacing is important, and working together versus working in a pair is important. I think if anyone feels that they are getting tired, they should choose the time that they spend working with someone else wisely on things that matter, that bring more efficiency to the team, and not more than they feel they can. People, and I think here we need to have a bit of understanding about introverts and extroverts, and a bit of empathy about everybody, who how we gain energy and how we lose energy through social interactions. um, People aren't that used to this approach of trying to understand the other team member, the other colleague in this way. So I think that's a step to take. Why? In order not to judge them, that they aren't they aren't willing to work in a team. They're not a team player. Or I don't know what. And so that's the thing. Choose wisely the time that you spend. I know people who say I cannot work more than 1 hour per day, and maybe not even every day, and that's perfectly fine. But try to pair on something that makes sense and that brings value to the team.
Okay, and to conclude about remote pair programming, we discussed a bit about some of the challenges and some of the tools that you can do, and there's no reason to go into a list of tools because they change in time
Yeah.
and you'll also find them.
The only thing is that I prefer the IDE approach because with an add-on, because it's easier to set up and you don't have a lag. For me, the lag, like with screen sharing, it's extremely annoying, and I don't know any screen sharing tool that works well. So that's uh, I think those tools will become better and better. Never minding what they are, but any type of ID, I think that's a good approach.
There are some tools that have very little lag, uh,
Yeah.
but those are used mostly for gamers, and usually they
Mm,
don't fit the corporate policies, the corporate security policies.
yeah.
So there might be a challenge there. So that's about tools. And you mentioned tools, you mentioned video and audio, and other than that, the rules, let's say, stay the same. You need to have some kind of time box, you need to have a debriefing. Is there anything else that's different in a remote approach from a normal approach other than the things that we talked about?
I think yes. The fact that you don't have the other person near you means that you need to communicate better. Anyway, pair programming is an exercise in communication, and you need to be very good at how you express yourself. Short, but and meaningful, and with sense. And it's difficult. When you are remote, you need to choose even better your words, because even if it's you have my setup where you have a monitor with the code and the monitor with the other person, you still need to choose your words good better, because you don't have the other person near you to look at. So what do you mean? I don't get that. Brevity, I think, is essential when you are remote. Don't start explaining in depth. Try to have smaller chunks of communication, and then ask for feedback. Ask your partner if they understood what you were saying. So that becomes a lot more difficult, I think. And it's the same with the debriefing. You need to you really need to make it uh, with noting things down and so on, as I said. But also look at the tools when you do debriefing, because you have other tools and maybe you want to change them. Maybe you want to try something out. So you have this complexity of remote tools, and they might help you or not. So debriefing, you should talk about tools as well.
All right, so anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention?
Uh, I think there are a few things that come to my mind, but I just want to mention one maybe. Uh, I think ensemble programming is a word I didn't use until now. Ensemble programming means that when you are together, so it's this family of pair programming, wall programming. This ensemble programming is the way of working in complex environments, and when you feel stuck, when you feel it's very difficult to work on something, when there are a lot of people involved, try to use it as much as possible. Try to forget about, or at least dodge company policies on that. Your responsibility is to produce quality software. And from my experience, whenever things are difficult, complex, ensemble programming will help you a lot, and you'll get things a lot faster. So try out also mob programming. There are a few books on that. There are a few, like the code retreats, there are mob retreats, there are remote now. Try to join one of those as well. Try it out in your organization if you can, and linger a bit there. Stay a while and see their advantages, because in the beginning it would be extremely awkward to pair or to mob. But if you do it well, after a while you'll see the benefits.
All right. So where can people get the book? How is it called? And
Yeah, so this is the book. You can get it on Amazon or on the Pact site. The Pact is the editor. Um, yeah, it's available, of course, in ebook form or like this printed. We can and yeah, I think it's important to look at it as a kind of a guidebook. I keep mentioning that in the book that your context might be different. I didn't want to write about every context. So look at it like guidance. It's not a recipe for anything.
all right. So we talked a lot about pair programming and remote pair programming. Now, if you want to try pair programming or remote pairing, one easy way is to contact us because we might have some time for this. Now, we cannot promise anything, but in case we have some time, it's always a fun activity to try out. Another way is to go to a code retreat and try pair programming there. There's one particular session in the code retreat that is a lot of fun and that shows you how pair programming is a lot about communication, and it's called silent pairing. With its even weirder option, which is silent evil pairing. Silent pairing means you are writing code, one person writes the test. You do this in a test-driven development way. So one person writes the test, the other writes the code, but you are not allowed to speak. And so this gets into very interesting in this very interesting situation that you need to communicate through code rather than through other means. And silent evil pairing is more like a fun game where a person writes the test and the other one writes the most evil code that passes the test. And this is not, it's more like to show that your tests are not as good as you think. But if you want to learn more about pairing, what I noticed is that silent pairing will show you how much communication is actually involved in this. And then there are a lot of other pair programming games that you can try out in your organization, in a community. If you search the internet for those, you can find them. So I think that's it. Thank you so much, Adi, for taking the time and having this conversation. We actually don't have time to chat about these things too much, it's quite nice to do that. Before we close, we have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm. So please like, share, subscribe, post these links, tell other people about pair programming, remote pair programming, and about this video and these conversations. If you are interested in related conversations, Adi mentioned about strong pairing style, which was created by Llewellyn Falco, and we have a conversation with him on the channel. And I think we discussed with a few other people about pair programming. So you'll see the related videos here if we remember to add them. And thank you so much for listening and for watching this. Until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.